All right, we can see the screen. It's our last day together. We are going to start with something that came up as a request from a number of people, which is the very, very, very basics of open source verification. So I'm going to start with that. Then we will move into interviewing. Then we'll have our break. And we will start our video reviews after the break and end on a couple of final notes where I'll be talking again more about where you can find some of our resources, work that my organization does and how to get in touch with us, and a brief overview of our library of resources. Okay, ready to start? Okay. So the first thing we are starting with is I had a couple of people ask me how to work through the Google reverse image search. And I'm going to do that live with you with one of our photos. One thing is that Google reverse image search is not even called that anymore. It is now called Google Lens. And what I'm going to do is show you all how to do this through your desktop. Of course, it may look a little bit different on your phone, and especially given various smartphones and their operating systems. Okay, so now we're going to get out of our PowerPoint slide, and we start off with Google. Unlike Google searches, you can go immediately to the search by image logo. So it's going to be that camera logo you see in the corner of the search bar. And you can upload a file or drag an image. So we're going to go ahead and drag ours over. Oh, where did my image go? This is why archiving and cataloging is very important. It's on my desktop. All right, it's fine to this image. So what we see on screen right now is Google is already doing some of its very fancy new AI capabilities, which is it's searching for text in the image first. All right, so what did they highlight here? LA Insurance. And what do we have on the right-hand side? So they went ahead, Google is going to go ahead and try to give you all instances of LA Insurance similar looking photos that they can find. Now, this is not much help to us because LA Insurance is not Los Angeles Insurance. It's nationwide all across America. So we're going to ignore the entire right-hand side of the screen, and we're going to go straight into find image source up top here. And we have found a couple. One thing, what did I say? What city did I say this was in yesterday? Madison Heights, Michigan. It's a very small city, and you should not know it. And of course, that's the first thing that comes up, right? But one thing I want to warn you about, and why I say open source is something it's a process we learn. It's not just technical capabilities that we learn. Can anyone else see different cities listed in this list further down below? Yep. So we have one in Missouri. And if anyone knows, Michigan and Missouri are almost as far apart as parts of Germany and Italy. Another one is another city, but in the same state, Warren, Michigan. And I can tell you from experience, Warren is close to Madison Heights. Another one we have, this one is Madison Heights. And so the first thing you want to do is what I talked about yesterday is let's document our documentation process. So once you do this, before you start clicking on anything else, you should be writing down if you're seeing differences in results from this list first, right? So say I am seeing a couple of different cities here. You can even write, your presumed location might be Madison Heights. If you had heard from a trusted source, that might be that. And let's go ahead and start clicking through some of them, right? So we're going to click on this one. And Oh, come on. And do you see the photo that we were looking for? No. So again, this is the problem of using things like Google image search sometimes, because I clicked on that site and it did not lead me to that page, which was actually, it's a real estate page. It did not lead me to the original source Google is thinking it is, which is the advertisement for the sale of that retail space, right? It just gave me the general what's on sale right now in Madison Heights, Michigan. So this is one thing you should, again, be prepared to come across. It's not a reason to give up, but it's something that you're going to want to remember, because what we'll do now is go back and try to find any information on this Google search results page that might have an address on it, right? So if we scroll back down and we're looking for Madison Heights, we see one right here, 1850 East 12 Mile Road, Madison Heights. So this is where we're for the moment done with Google search, right? Or Google image search. We're going to go take this address. Oh, they won't let me copy it. That's sad. 1850 East 12 Mile Road. And you see that here we go. That is that same site, Prexy.com, that we were viewing earlier. So here we are getting to the page that Google refused to allow us to see. And it's still not the same image, right? So what we're going to do is start looking through this posting to see if there are images of that strip mall that might look like they're similar. So we'll open up Google Maps and we will zoom in on the street view if it's allowed. If it's allowed, you'll see this little yellow guy on the bottom right-hand corner, right? So we'll put our guy here and see if we can actually get a view of this infamous strip mall. Let's look around. That's the one. What makes you think?
It's kind of
same structure?
the
The one on the left.
I don't know.
You're talking about this one. So
That is how, without a view, I wouldn't have known that is quiet. How could I myself?
Oh yeah, so without me still, if this is the first result that comes up, we're still gonna slightly rely on the algorithm to say, because if you can even do this, if you zoom in on this page, if this will let me. Okay.
So I will
Here, if we zoom in on this page, it is pulling, you can see it's tiny, but you can see this image result has been indexed to this page, right? So you're going to lead with Madison Heights, but because of the problem, so even if I never existed, right? You're going to say, okay, Madison Heights, Michigan. And if you can match up to this image right here, that's what we want to go with. But remember, when we clicked on it, there was no information. It didn't even go to this specific location. It didn't give us the image. So that's when you would go scroll down and see if you can find any addresses for that area. So again, we're back at the addresses. So we've got one potential location right here. We should still be looking around, right? So, because what else do you see in the background over there? There's another strip mall, right? So what you're going to do is go around to that side and see, because our little yellow guys in the Google Street View is not always perfectly accurate. The other thing that might happen is, if you can see what we're on, and I'm just going to let you know, we're on DeQuinder Road here. So Google Maps might have been a little bit off. So what we're going to do is go back to that side and see if we can get a little bit closer on that side and get some more information. So we're going to go on this side. Trying to get into this strip mall right here, okay? And you can see there's a bank and there's some more in the background. And it looks like things have changed quite a bit, right? So something that, and I'm not going to continue into this investigation, right? Because it's going to take the next half hour. But what you're going to do next is go ahead and type in that same address in a new browser with that street address in a new browser. And most browsers these days have private windows. So open up a private window, put in that address and see what results you get on the street view, right? So this is because we need to remember that our search history, all of the information that we might have been typing into Google beforehand is going to influence the kinds of results that pop up on our search page, right? So I'm gonna do that search one more time and in a private window. No. So did you just see what happened when I had to reject twice? That's cookies, that's tracking information that, again, I'm using private window to try to avoid, right? So when these items pop up, say no, reject all, do not log in, right? Because we're trying to get a little bit more of a clean search results as much as possible. And here we go. So it was confirmed what our colleagues said earlier before. This is now a Sprint store, right? And it has been taken over by likely another company. So we have other companies here, Baskin-Robbins, Dunkin' Donuts, which means that we cannot what this means is that the original image we were searching for is a historical photo. So with a historical photo, we cannot rely on current open source data. What we're going to have to do then is what? Give me two ideas.
Search for a more recent photo.
Search for a more recent photo. Yes. How would that help? If the ownership and all the companies in the strip mall have changed.
Maybe we can look for photos for the companies around.
Yes. This is when open source becomes primary source. We would want to get in touch with people who live in the area. We could also go into public databases such as the local library, who might have photos of celebrations, local celebrations that happened in the area, and people who live there who might have photos when they lived there, when this was up for sale, potentially. Ultimately, right, we need to remember though, we want these kinds of photos, we want to verify it happened in a certain place because we're working with a human rights video. A violation, a crime had happened in that area. So you can still use these current photos to help to try to understand the blueprint of the area, right? We can try to use this current photo to try to understand if this is a major intersection right here, right? Let's say if the police stated that the people they shot were driving in a car and ran through a red light at 3:30 in the afternoon. What does that mean, for example? If you see how major this intersection is. That likely might not be possible, right? If you're in rush hour traffic at a certain time in this area, and these are two major roads that we would have been seeing in a heavily populated area, right? That would have been impossible. So even that current photo, even though it's Sprint, it's not the same exact photo that we can use to verify the previous one, we can still use this information to get an understanding of the space, an understanding of the layout of the area that then our friends, analysts, lawyers can help use that information to get a sense of the scene. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the reasons I love this example is because it really shows us how not easy it is to find photos and to use things like reverse image search. Okay. The photos I gave you a couple days ago to verify are photos that I directly took from the first line of Google image searches for those areas, right? If I had even taken a smaller snapshot of that fuller photo of Skopje, Macedonia, for example, it would have been very hard for you to find it on Google reverse image search, okay? If we had taken it and then I had sent it to a friend and it had become more compressed again, and then I took a screenshot, yet another screenshot, that again will degrade the amount of information that Google will be able to find. Okay, so all of this is just to say, hopefully, we always hope for luck, and we always hope that we get some solid results. And if we don't, these are the next steps we take. This is why it's an investigation. All right. If anyone really wants to know what I would have done next, I would have been going through each of these addresses. So that was just the first address. There's another one, Grashford Avenue. There's one on John R. Road. There's one on De Quinder Road, right? So plenty of addresses. We would start going through each of them and repeating that same process. So that's Google reverse image search. What we can do with metadata though, so for that image, we really didn't have any metadata. I'm showing you an image right now on screen of a photo I took a few days ago on my walk back to the hotel. And in terms of metadata and the kind of information we can get there, for iPhone users, we are lucky enough that Apple made an update recently that when you go to your photo gallery and you choose a photo, all you have to do is swipe up and you will see what's on the right-hand side of the screen right now. What do you guys see?
Date.
You see the date and the time. What else? The file size, good. What else do you see? Yeah, so you're seeing now very specific information on what kind of camera lens was used. Use the resolution. You also see it's an Apple iPhone 11 Pro Max, right? All of this information on its own doesn't really prove anything, but together, right? If we're trying to verify a photo and it claims that it's from 2018, what would we say about a photo that's claimed it was of a crime in 2018 that happened on the street corner and you see Apple 11 Pro Max? It hadn't come out then, right? Now, it's not the only way, right? But that's just an example of how we can use the information associated with this metadata to help verify. Now, who said that they saw the date? Was it you? Yeah. What do you see? What do you see next to the date? They've also added a really easy option to adjust the dates. So this is also where we have to remember metadata is not everything. It's one small piece of the puzzle. Because I went ahead and adjusted that date to say that it was taken 8 days from now. That's on photos. Let's take an example. Let's see an example of a video. So I'm going to use Adobe Premiere Pro. It's just it's Adobe's video editing tool. Again, this is one that costs money. I will leave a link to another tool that's called EXIF tool. It's an open source tool. It's free. It's consistently updated by a group of very dedicated coders. And it allows you to view on both Windows, Mac, operating systems, Linux, everything else. But I'm going to use Premiere just because I had it handy on my laptop. All right, so this is Adobe Premiere. Don't worry about anything else you see on screen because Premiere is as I mentioned before, a really handy, powerful way to edit videos. But I've selected this clip that I'm going to play for you really shortly. It's someone giving an overview of what is now an empty space. Oh, yeah. Oh, not in this. Oh, there we go. So it's a very basic. Some of you may have done this kind of shot yesterday, a walkthrough of the space. Not a very good one, I would say. I don't know if you all would agree, but there it is. If we go into the metadata, so if anyone happens to use Adobe, you can go into your window and check the metadata window. If you can see anything, I don't know how, this is probably really hard for you all to see. I'm going to take a screenshot of this. What do we see here? Does it have an audio track number? Does it have a release date? No. It's completely scrubbed. It's absolutely completely scrubbed because the frame rate you see is something that Premiere had calculated about this video. This again was a video sent to me over WhatsApp. Now a fully robust video is going to have, let me open another one up. Okay, good. I'm going to add this here. Now this one, what do you see? Does it have anything more on it? So for this one, we have a little bit more information. It does not have anything else related to it. I thought it would, but it does not, because it was not a video I took natively on my laptop. So one thing that we're going to do, because I don't have any native videos on my phone right now, it has been scrubbed for travel, is we're going to review some of your videos. I am going to open some of the metadata files up and see what we can see. And because we have the original filmers in the room, you guys can tell me if we can verify it, okay? So, and because we're running a little bit late on time. So we are going to go back into our slides and to say with metadata, we're going to be looking for, at the very least, three main things. When it comes to date, you want to be very careful that you're not looking at the date that it was created. Okay, because the date of creation most often in digital media is going to be the date that it was uploaded to a specific device. So you're going to be looking at timestamps, time filmed, okay, date and time filmed. You're going to be looking for the GPS coordinates. These are going to be latitude and longitude. Metadata is not going to be nice like the iPhone and say, this is Venice, Italy, at the corner of this and this street. It's going to give you latitude and longitude, which you'll then have to go back into an online source to type in and find out where exactly it was. When it comes to more information on open source investigations and how to do them, I highly recommend looking into First Draft News. First Draft News, they started off training journalists. Now they train a lot of other people. So they have trainings and they also have free resources online that help you understand how to do verification. And also what verification was known as before, fact checking. The Human Rights Center at the University of California, Berkeley is another one. They do have trainings very specific to digital open source investigations for human rights. UC Berkeley sometimes does these trainings at their campus in California, United States, but they do partner with NGOs and civil society organizations and activists who want to get trained up themselves. Another group is the Amnesty International Citizen Evidence Lab. They do numerous investigations themselves. However, they also have they sometimes do trainings, and they have what's really handy is on their page that I included a screenshot of, you'll have how-tos. So, for example, how to use Google Translate when working in foreign languages, and how to use a number of different open source tools in your own investigations. Finally, if you want to really dig deep, and this is going to be, open source is going to be a big part of your human rights work, I highly, highly recommend purchasing and owning a copy of this book. It's called Digital Witness. It has contributions from members of my own team, as well as lots of our allies in the field, and especially part 2 of this book, which is on how to do things yourself. Part 1 of this book goes into detail about how case studies, principles, and also how open source investigations were conducted in other areas and in existing case studies. Part 2 is all about the how. However, that book is about $45 US, depending on where you live. It might be even more expensive, and I hate that. I've asked their editors if we can get some type of access code for free, and they are not allowed to do that yet. And it's not up to them, it's actually up to the publisher. So what I'm going to do is what I do have permission to do is to upload 1 chapter, and that chapter is going to be how to conduct discovery using open source methods. So I will be uploading a copy of that PDF along with the PowerPoint slides. And I do have, when I fly back to New York City, I have 2 extra copies of this book. So again, if you are someone who is already or needing to use open source investigations for human rights, let's chat after today's session, and I can, it might be first come, first serve, but I'll be able to, I can grab your address and ship it to you as well. Now for the free stuff, there is a section that is a little bit wider beyond just open source, which is part of the Witnesses Videos Evidence Guide, and that is on an entire section on sharing and verifying eyewitness video. And that's also related to the ethics of using video in reporting and advocacy, so outside of the courts. All right, this brings us to interviewing. So one thing that, the number one thing we have to remember when it comes to interviewing is the constellation of support we have to give before you even approach someone and before you even get in touch and start interviewing someone. The constellation of support is psychological support, the right to privacy, further protection, medical care, offering a safe space, legal empowerment, and helping them address the root causes of the harm. This is a lot. I am not saying that you all, as people who work with communities who have been harmed, have to provide all of this, but all of this constellation is something you have to be prepared to look into and to help connect them with, okay? Now, we have, oh, go ahead.
Because you're talking this range of. My question is so. The Spanish people who are gathering evidence, but also they also get this.
They should, a lot of them do, and a lot of times they don't. Yes, so for evidence, the United Kingdom is a country that has led the charge on this. They have developed something called the PSVI protocols. These are specific to interviewing survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And what they did, along with releasing the PSVI protocols, is also start a program to help train people who want to be trained on it. So I can make sure to also include that in the list of resources. They don't do training super often. I think they only happen a couple of times a year. You also have training programs at The Hague. The Hague Academy does this type of training as well, and also with a focus on, of course, criminal justice and criminal law. And other groups are really good at this too. The Murad Code was launched by a survivor who ended up doing a lot of advocacy on sexual violence and also interviewing. So the Murad Code was released last year. I highly recommend looking into that as well, because the code and the organizations that have helped release it also offer trainings. Does that help? So yes, if you all remember the 3 stories I put up about the consequences of people who, again, were highly respected and professionals in their field, who still ended up with issues of consent, issues of over-interviewing and over-collection, and further harm to survivors. So I would say, at a minimum, get trained, but also continue to work within your own community of practice to continue building up those skills and to stay in touch with what's happening on the ground. Are we ready to move on? Okay. Can anyone tell me the difference between advocacy, preliminary, and comprehensive interviewing? Have you ever heard of any of the 3? Has anyone ever done an advocacy interview? So we are looking at, today, what I'm going to be talking about is all about preliminary interviewing, okay? Comprehensive interviews, also called investigative interviews, are what we do, are what trained people only ought to be doing. So when I said you ought to be trained to do that, that's a comprehensive investigative interview. This is usually why the bar is so high for these interviews is because, and why I tell people to only do preliminary interviews is because if an interview is not conducted correctly, the other thing that may happen is you might put that person's case at risk, because depending on the types of questions we answer, the type of preparation we have done, we might have the person we are interviewing remember something they hadn't remembered before. We might have them, if we ask them for more details at one point later on in the interview, they might give a detail that might even contradict something they said before. right? So this is also about understanding how to read people's levels of comfort and trauma, and if they are in a state of mind to be able to give this kind of interview. And it has happened way too many times that amazing video interviews have been done. Investigators come back later to officially do an evidentiary interview, and suddenly it looks like the witness has lied. And they're no longer a reliable source of information. So this is why we do this. This is why I offer all of these warnings. So advocacy interviews are usually collected by community members, journalists, of course, activists, filmmakers, NGOs, and they can be really conducted in a lot of different environments. I've seen, you have them done on the street at protests, you have them done in people's homes, you have them done in shopping centers, and as well as pretty much anywhere else. And usually they're filmed shortly after a human rights event has taken place, right? So go ahead.
No, it's not very.
Okay, so one of the reasons we're thinking about time here is because there is a reason for this, right? An investigator, a lawyer, even a trained interviewer is likely not going to be able to be at the scene of the crime right after it happened or violation. So what we do want people to do, of course, is to be able to capture initial information of what happened, even to be able to, sometimes advocacy interviews happen during live streams, right? So if we're at a protest and someone was just hit with a rubber pellet by a police officer, after they've gotten help, and we've seen that they're okay, a lot of other people will come in and say, hey, like, tell us what happened, as a sort of citizen journalist approach to it. Yes.
Yeah, the question and from legal perspective. But it's just that this question, because we're talking about calling into question witness, being witness and hearsay. Usually it's like if they're that person is not directly involved or related, hearsay are involved in primary victims to be related. But I assume in human rights violations, they probably because human rights violations are against group or a whole population or etc. So many of the witnesses are getting involved in the crime and there's hearsay. Make sure that they don't get called.
So if you are doing a video or an audio interview with someone who was present or with someone who something happened, the crime happened to, that is not hearsay. Yeah. So, and again, this is where technology, there were questions about like when video was first started to be introduced in courts. And by the way, this wasn't super recent. It was happening during the Nuremberg trials. This is why we want to make sure that the video you take, if it's for evidence, is done in a way that is going to be a representation of testimony that can be given at trial, right? So that is not hearsay because that video is going to be it can be the replacement of that person showing up at trial at times. Other times it is an evidentiary interview that serves a purpose in the investigation. And we will call that person eventually to show up in their physicality in court. In other times, you might have, and what's most often used in terms of videos is expert testimony that might be given. And it's not necessarily testimony, it's rather going to be a review. It's going to be something, again, that helps the investigative process. And helps in what we call pre-trial motions. So before the trial starts, we also need certain types of evidence to convince the judges to take on the case, to convince the prosecutors of the courts to take on the case. And that is also evidence, however, it may not be trial-ready evidence.
Maybe it's not like actual witnesses, they are dead. So you have to rely on outside witnesses who saw or heard something, like neighbors and neighbors.
It does happen very often, and it still happens often that if that person has passed away or even refuses due to safety to show up in court, that we will use that pieces of that video. Again, not as, and again, I won't be getting into it because we can't, but it won't be primary evidence, but it can serve as corroborative evidence or even linkage evidence at times. Okay, so advocacy interviews is something that I train a lot of people to do, right? And I would say you do not have to be formally trained. You do not go into a certificate program to do this. It's important to learn the basics, and those are also going to be very helpful. What we are talking about today is preliminary evidentiary interviews. So this is what is collected by documenters who are on the front lines. They're conducted in the field during or shortly after the incident. It's usually captured in a spontaneous manner. They're not going to be super long in length. And the goals are to collect basic information that is later going to help investigators. So that is going to be to determine if this person has relevant information for eventual justice for whatever crime or violation happened. It's to identify if there are any other additional witnesses or even physical evidence that these people are aware of, and then to see if they would be interested in providing further information. This is very key because you might speak to someone and they might have incredibly important information, but if they refuse to engage with investigators or with police, and many might because they might suddenly have a distrust of any weapons wielding forces, such as police or military or security, they might be too traumatized to further engage. This is why we end with to see if they are interested in providing their story, in engaging further with the justice system or even advocacy system later down the line. Okay. So overarching questions, we always start with something we call the decision tree. So there are three main points here that I ask people to think about. That is, should you approach the survivor? Think about why do you need to talk to them? Think about why do we need to use video in the first place even, or audio? And if you determine that it is important, is it okay to interview them? So even though you may not be trained up by the PSVI team or others, think about, and we're using basic human logic here. We're using basic emotional recognition here. Is the person distressed, right? Are they, and sometimes they might not be distressed. Sometimes they might be so eager to tell their story because you might be the person standing between them telling the story to their world and the story disappearing, right? This is asking yourself if you should approach them is also a question of reflecting on your own power in this case, because usually the person who holds the camera has the power, whether we realize it or not. So think about what state this person is in, why you think it's necessary to approach them, and if it would be okay to interview them. And if it's okay to interview them, think about your approach. So how would you interview them? We usually start with an understanding of if you're at the scene of a violation or a crime, is that a safe place to be interviewing people in the first place? Is there a risk of more violence happening? Is there, or even, is there a risk of it raining on you suddenly and getting your camera and your devices wet and potentially not working? Next, we go into consent. The consent process is going to be, as much as I teach it, the consent process cannot be perfect if you're on the scene of a crime and if you're on the front lines. You're not going to have time to do usually an introductory approach, introducing yourself, what you do, what your organization does, and then doing an exchange, usually of emails and phone calls, to find the right place to interview them and the right time, right? So on the front lines, the consent process is usually highly synthesized, which is why we get really bad consent situations happening. But ultimately, all you need to know for consent is before you start filming or interviewing, does the person understand who you are and what you're trying to do? Do they have an understanding of what you are going to use their information for? And do they have an understanding of all of the risks associated with them giving you this information? 4 major things. And the way to check them is to ask that person to repeat it back to you. And if they cannot repeat it back to you, that means you have not explained the process well enough, and you start again. Okay? But the biggest issue here is, and especially when we're dealing with sexual violence survivors, is the kinds of questions that are asked. I have put up a non-exhaustive list of questions you can consider and start with. It is really hard to also interview someone who is not from the same cultural background as you. And this is, again, especially true for certain human rights crimes violations, and especially true for sexual violence. So when I say you might want to have and prepare questions, if you're someone who's on the front lines, you might want to prepare questions in your free time for various situations, because you want to yourself and even ask your peers to review your questions with you, and even ask them, do I sound judgmental? If you were this victim, would you feel like you were being blamed for the incident? Do you feel disrespected? Right? So the peer review process is not something that you can only do with academic experts and with the people who might be training professionally in the field, but rather even go up to your regular family members and friends and see how the impact of these questions land on them. The reason I say this, of course, is because most times, most of the sexual violence survivors I've spoken to have said that they have never had a single safe interview where they didn't feel judged about their experience in their lives. So this is why we do it. In essence, for a preliminary interview, do not ask direct questions about what you know or think might have happened to them, right? So, for example, if I were at the scene of a protest, again, of that person who was hit by a rubber bullet, I would not ask them, when did the rubber bullet hit you? Where did the rubber bullet hit you? Those are questions that ought to be reserved for comprehensive interviews. What you should be asking are open-ended questions. First, of course, starting off with the person introducing themselves, and then going into really just asking them to explain what happened to them, right? Keep it open-ended, keep it non-specific. You can, of course, do follow-ups once they introduce what happened to them, such as, when did this take place? Or can you tell me a little bit about the location this took place at? You can, of course, ask them, can you tell me a little bit about the people who might have done this to you or who did this to you? How they have come to the information they know about the perpetrators. And then most importantly, if you look at the last 3 questions, that is that important follow-up and understanding that is this person comfortable speaking to someone else or a professional investigator that you even could connect them with, or perhaps pass over information to? Would they, and usually if you see the third to last and the second to last questions, they're the exact same question, but we ask them in different ways to make sure that the person we're interviewing is grasping what we're trying to get at. So when I say, would you be open to speaking to a professional investigator? And they say, yes, I would be completely open and safe to doing that. I will try to usually follow up with, would speaking to a professional investigator make you feel unsafe in any way? Because that might get them thinking about something or a situation that might happen that they weren't originally thinking about, right? So they might say yes to the first question because they're so eager to get their story out and they want the world to know what happened. But they might not have been thinking about the fact that maybe local or national police officers have a reputation for not listening or even making fun of women who have been raped, right? So asking that question in a different way, so saying, are you open? And then, would this make you feel unsafe? Or can you think of any situations that would make you feel unsafe, is a really good way to have like both bilateral approaches to the same question. Yes?
In your experience, how would you strike a balance? Being empathetic, showing emotional compassion, being objective, and not being condescending or like showing. But
in my opinion, in my personal and professional opinion, objectivity doesn't exist. This is, again, I would say quite a giant construct that comes from the history of colonialism and the idea that Western, usually global North and Western professionals, and it comes from the journalism field and the legal field, who say, well, we are objective, we are non-emotional about this, and that is what's required for the highest level of investigative reporting. And that same argument is used to keep people who are, again, highly trained experts from that region or that country or that city from being able to do the same, because they're suddenly seen as too emotional, unable to be objective, right? So just to make a note on that in terms of objectivity, you can't be objective. I mean, show me a human who can interview a rape survivor and stay completely emotionally neutral.
Like not and so I don't know, I didn't know that this was like
Yeah, so it has been the standard to, again, and you will hear many people say, stay objective, stay neutral when you do also human rights work, any kind of other work. What I think sometimes that is getting to, and I would recommend you do, is try not to deepen or exacerbate the survivor's emotional responses, right? So I understand. So in one case, right, is, for example, if the person you're interviewing starts crying, and of course we as humans might empathize and cry with them, right? And that's completely fine. But you should not continue asking questions at that point, right? Or you should not, you can take them aside and say that you empathize, right? But to continue to build on that emotion through your interviewing is going to be something that is only going to, it won't help the interview process, and it may harm them in that moment as well. Because we all need empathy, but sometimes we want to make sure we're not replacing our empathy with a situation where they might need support from a family member, a trusted loved one, or a trained professional. But what we can do in interviews is make sure that we're providing that safe space as much as possible. What does often help is to speak in as much as possible in a slow voice, right? So that we're not rushing through and we're not rushing them to feel more stressed. And that we are also taking pauses, right? So again, we will likely also be feeling emotions, but that doesn't mean we can't take pauses to first allow them to respond. So one thing I see a lot of people who are beginning their journeys in human rights interviewing take is the moment their interviewee finishes their sentence, they move right on to the next question. So we want to take a pause and allow them to continue. Maybe if they wanted to take a break, if you see their eyes looking up, for example, eyes looking up is always a sign. Go ahead and give them that space to continue thinking, to continue responding. But the easiest way is to also take a pause and then say, is there anything else you want to add, right? You can literally come out and say it. But of course, yes, our presence there ought to be, we should try to be the calming force, not the neutral force. We should be the calming force if possible. And if it's not possible, again, work with the pauses, work with, again, continuing to read their body language. If they are curling up, if they continue to, wrap their arms around themselves. And then, of course, if there are more serious signs, such as shaking, such as a wavering in their voice. For example, also, if they need to cry, go ahead and stop the interview. Maybe pause the interview, or you can ask them if they want to stop the interview altogether. You want to be continuously having this feedback and check-in with them as the interview is happening. Yes.
I have like 3 follow-up questions.
Okay.
First of all,
So this is a preliminary interview. So if there is a need for one, you stop the interview immediately and try to help them get help. Yeah.
second follow-up question. It's French, but as you mentioned, it is important criteria for trials and etc. And is the soft problem.
Yes, so of course, remember your training. So with these preliminary interviews, we still want to make sure that we are not narrating something that is prejudicial, right? So again, remember our training. Even if you are interviewing someone who, for example, you are in the recently liberated territories of Ukraine, you are interviewing a rape survivor. You, based on lots of other information, are likely sure that it was the Russians who did it, but you do not know. In that moment, you do not know who it was that raped that person, right? If you weren't there, you do not know. You might have 1,000 million pieces of other evidence pointing to it, but you do not know. So if you're doing that preliminary interview, any words about your knowledge of the perpetrator should not be coming out of your mouth, right? Because you're not the one giving testimony. So if your interviewee is stating what happened to them and who the perpetrators were, of course, you can nod your head and you can sympathize, right? But you should not be repeating those words back as affirmation. And we don't need to in order to empathize and sympathize with people. Yes.
Do you often feel like these preliminary interviews sort of constitute like a training for people, not training, but like a simulation of how people have just for a trial, like a training for them for how they will be by lawyers?
Absolutely not. They're so different.
Training for that way worse than
Who do you mean by they?
like if
Witnesses
you
do.
testify, do they get like training for trial?
I would be very careful about calling it training. That is illegal. But they do get information as to what kinds of questions they may expect, as you said, and they do get information as to what resources are available to them as well in their participation in the trial. This is done by the lawyers team. Usually it's also a member of the prosecution team because, yeah, for criminal cases, the lawyers are the prosecution. But those people, again, because they're trained, they will have always available and with them someone who works with victims representatives as well. Yes. That is a really, really important point and a very contentious topic in the world of human rights and how and where human rights sometimes differs from journalism. So, for example, in journalistic practice, you are absolutely never allowed to offer anything in exchange for someone's interview. Otherwise, that would be seen as buying information or buying a story. In human rights, what I talk about here is, if you remember, this constellation, what I remember what I said, while you may not be responsible for this entire constellation of support, you ought to be helping them get connected to that support. So at the very minimum, right, if I'm showing up to an interview, I'm showing up with a box of tissues, water or something to drink, and something to eat or snack on, right? I just do that as a human. Now, I'm also telling you all, I'm not a journalist, okay? But if you are a lawyer or someone who is a human rights defender and doing these kinds of interviews, you should absolutely provide some type of support. And for example, if you're asking someone to meet you somewhere, you can absolutely offer to buy their bus ticket or to give them a bus ticket back or money for one, right? We don't want people to suffer even more just because we want them to give us information, right? So that's, again, the difference when I talk about the differences between human rights practice and principles versus journalistic practice standards and principles versus legal practice and principles. So yeah, if someone you are talking to needs further assistance, I'm not saying you should give all of your money out of your wallet to them, right? You have to make sure you're protected and secured as well. But you should absolutely be thinking about if there is a group you can connect them with, and even where information as to where they can apply to get money, or even to find a safe house. Find a safe house, find somewhere to sleep for the night. If you have that capacity, if you are someone with local knowledge, you likely will be doing that. If you are a foreigner, remember, you, as someone who works internationally, you do not want to be the person coming in from a foreign country, parachuting in and out, and then leaving people high and dry, right? So, and be honest. If you are, say, I'm so sorry, I don't know any local organizations or anyone who can help you, but let me go try to find out if I can, right? You can be honest about that, but don't make false promises, but connect them with the support if it is possible.
There are so many because
I mean, and if it's a journalist who, like, if it's something that's pre-planned, right? Like they've communicated about it a few days beforehand, right? It's not something, on the scene at a protest. if there was something that is pre-planned, then I would say that journalist ought to have planned to have someone who is a victims' rights advocate or even a community advocate locally present at the interview as well. So that if resources are needed, that is already being connected. Any other questions? Is that one?
Yes.
I would say yes. This is why I always recommend, for example, even for someone like myself, if I'm going into Yemen, I'm not going to be asking to do the interview. I'm going to be supporting human rights defenders and community advocates locally to do the interview. I'll be helping them with resources, how to prepare for the questions, right? But it ought to be, again, if we're going by higher human rights standards, it ought to be in their native language, if it's possible. And again, if we're not one of them, if we're not a part of the community, then we should be supporting those who can interview and document. So again, that goes back to the question is of why should I be the one doing this? Okay, why should I even film? Should I even approach? If there's already, right, community groups who can do it, then you should be asking yourself, how do we support them, right? Okay, we are going to take a break and I'll talk a little bit about these resources after the break. I'm going to shorten the break, unfortunately, because we had quite a bit more engagement on interviewing than originally planned. So let's meet back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
The contact from the campus also.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
because
will.
I found all the presentation except yours.
Yes, there's a reason for that. I have been editing them every single day. So yeah, no, they will all be up, and my information will be in.
Thanks.
them as well.
Thanks.
Each happening is. But it might not. I think yeah, we go. Page 11, great. Thank you.
Does anyone in this room have footage from the filming exercise?
Yes.
If you do, come up to me. Great.
It's quite a big file.
Should we airdrop it? Yes. You should be looking for Dalila's MacBook Pro.
Okay, we have two videos.
You also have footage. Okay, you can airdrop it for Dalila's MacBook Pro.
Do you have Sarah?
Hold on. Do stream. Aha.
Oh, no, that's not mine. Wait.
Aha, here we go.
Sarah's phone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we did the whole thing of talking only in one of the videos, and then I explained later in the other video we'll show and with time. But we also didn't put the time at the end. I forgot, but we know what we have to, but I didn't put it.
Okay, I have yours as well. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else in the room have footage?
That made my day. Comments.
So. Anyone else? Final call? No more footage? Okay, then, what I am going to do is ask Preston and his team to come up here so that you can play your video and we'll review.
We didn't. That's it. I forgot. It's with you. It's with
All right, no, come up here. It's 7 minutes long. Well, that's gonna be a good one then. All right. I am handing over the microphone and control of the laptop to whoever of your team is going to control it.
Just it's just a matter of pressing press, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So. Okay, hopefully everybody is ready.
It's a big film.
We will now discuss 360 degrees for here and then we will and we will our one shot and then we will and photo. We are repeating the reception. And please, and those who I had from the school, I think that I last week and we have become or given.
Yes, I'm the very. We're there. Like this. Really up. So we must be still on it. So probably accommodate us.
It is and
See my hands.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Really, I.
All right, who not from that team could give me one example of something they did well? Yes.
Sorry, the second crisis degree,
Why would that help? Next.
But with the time that they have, so some of them see where they.
We wouldn't know though if those people want to be contacted though, right? So wait, but what would you all have put into your supplemental information report when you finished filming?
This is,
Mhm.
well, we put summary, we put the limitation, but we put us aspects of the data, for example. So the filming video. We wrote down the monastery and translation of the sign, that like kind of sign, the sign.
Very nice. But and so in relation to what our colleague just noted, that you captured other people who were at the scene. So one thing we could always do is ask other people at the scene if they would like to be contacted by someone who might investigate or come on later down the road. Okay, what else? Yes?
Just not going to catch my others.
Yes, indeed. We would have gone onto some open source online space that had the exact weather descriptions of what was happening later at the same time. Well, in addition to that, what else could we find to support the shots of the weather at the time? What else could we look for online to support or corroborate the weather? Date, time, sun positioning, yes. For example, given that this is Venice, we could look for Instagram photos tagged with Venice, for example, at the time. And that is another form of open source that can be quite easy to get. Did I see you have your hand raised as well?
yeah. Time they showed it on the phone. And on school they were like everything, and at the end they went again, finishing.
Good, good. What else? Did you have something to
I mean,
say?
I was going to say we should have zoomed out when we were taking the first important of this, track.
What do you mean by zoomed out? Are you saying you were zoomed in?
Maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just one. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So one thing that you can do for that to show context of the building is to do a separate shot from the road of the building from the outside, and then walk inside, and that can connect your multiple shots together. Yes.
with the street signs or with the street, and something that we also didn't do right or perfectly, and I think probably is when you are 60 shot. For example, ours is too fast altogether, and theirs is like fast. But like we also.
Yeah, and that's also completely understandable because this wasn't a full day, 8 hours dedicated to just filming. But another thing that I noticed is, first of all, one of the reasons that they were likely able to get that translation of the sign on the wall is because we also had a good, clear shot, independent shot of the sign itself, rather than just panning by it. I thought the shots were quite steady as well. Those were good. And and you guys had to adapt, right? Because the inside of the rooms, you couldn't hop inside to do those corners. So if you can't, right, you adapt as they did. And the only thing, and this is super, super tiny, that I would have done differently if I couldn't have gotten in there was to start at a lower corner and slowly go up and around and down. And then from bottom to up. And you did the bottom to up shots as well, very well. Anything else? What about the interview?
Start with this.
Yeah, I think we didn't know how to do this.
Yeah.
Right, so now I think many things that were kind of wrong.
I don't recall whether Terry introduced himself, like full name.
Mhm. So that's another mean thing I did. That's why I asked optional interviews so that we can reflect on them after you had a brief introduction here.
Issue with it.
Yes.
But that's it, the caretaker will always be that caretaker. You have, in a sense, given the nomenclature immediately. You don't need more than that.
And maybe I kind of interrupted to like understand what he was saying, but I should.
One brilliant thing you did in the interview is when he was pointing somewhere, the camera followed, right? So that's actually something that's quite good to do if you're on the scene of a crime, is to somehow have the camera follow and understand what they're describing, and so that we can also see what they're describing. Good. Anything else? So another really good thing in terms of the questioning process that I noticed was that, first of all, you also had the caretaker take you around and you followed him around, even though you'd already filmed that area. So that's really good to, if you're interviewing someone, they're providing context to the scene. And then you're also, again, having the camera follow them around that scene. And in terms of the questioning, I really actually liked the question that you asked if were there any remains? And I think the caretaker had answered, but that is a really good point of an example of ways to ask for additional information, right? So for example, if this is a very different filming context than, you know, a sit-down interview with, for example, a rape survivor that I was talking about. But in this example, because this person is the caretaker and was present there, you may ask additional informative questions because whether or not human remains were somewhere is highly valuable information as a preliminary interview, right? That investigators will later be able to use to connect what the information they have on missing or confirmed victims from the area. Good, very good. So again, another round of applause for you all. Really, really, really good job. Then let's have, is it Sara? I think you sent me the next set of videos. You sent me two, right? Okay.
The second one is the one that we should show first.
Okay.
Oh, that's not us though.
Oh, that's not you. So is that one of them?
Yeah,
Okay, and what about this?
I think this is the first one we want to show.
Okay. So feel free if you want to go into, oops, go into full screen. There you go.
Do we say anything about it first or just?
You can play them first.
It is currently 4:13 p.m. in Germany, and it's legal. Piazza and Morandi. I am now showing you what it is. Street. I will now be walking closer to the street sign where you can see the address of the at. Now I'll be walking closer to the monastery, which we will be filming from inside later on the video. Which commemorates the Chiesa di Piccolo. We will now be walking towards the entrance through the main door, where I will also be filming the doorbells and the sign which marks the school for human rights defenders. This is the entrance. I'm now coming in on the doorbell, where you can see it says open. Thanks. We will now be walking into the main entrance. And we will show you the 360 of the inside of this building. And in our later video, you will see a sign of the monastery. As well as some more evidence of this.
Where's the other video?
This one is.
Nope. Let's see how you do. Green one?
Yeah, the green one.
So, whole explanation, because we only spoke in the first video, not the second one, which was, we forgot. But our main focus will
the war crimes bill, but mostly under the Rome statute that it's illegal to attack religious and education sites. So that's why we not zoomed in, but walked closer to the signs that said like library, blah, 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 and like the signs that say San Marco and the last tombstone, the Jerusalem church, and very fast on the 360s, I'm sorry. But yeah, we also couldn't do the 360 of the sign, so we had to do like a 3-corner approach. That's why it looks very weird, but I didn't. And yes.
Great.
So just to add, very sadly, we might have lost our, we did a really nice camera report and somehow we really, we filled everything out with corroborative information and everything, because I don't know if you know this, but what we were focusing on was, even if the whole campus looks like a background, no, we were focusing on only the one hole in the flag. That was our main.
We didn't feel it, and we lost the paper, so that's why it's not in it.
Who else has something to add about the quality of what they did right and the quality of their videos? What else?
They use many signs, okay, or
Mm-hmm.
Sign up is really
Sign on the street. So that's what we call landscape marking. So they did exactly that. Another sign.
Also, like Sarah was explaining what he was doing, today, you should say later or something.
Yeah, we only said it in the beginning and then we forgot in the end to say what it was.
I mean, the date.
I think I only heard the time.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, so we want date and time. One thing I noticed about the narration that was good and high quality is that, and something you want to think about when you're talking about what you will do. And the narration is, think about if someone who has never been here before saw this video, could they draw a fairly accurate outline on the map of where they were? And I would say, yes, I would be able to. The entrance, the outside was described. She said which entrance they were in as they were entering the building, and then described the courtyard. So that all helps create this mental, and even later on could create a physical map that investigators could use to describe the scene and to put into evidence. What else? In terms of the 3-point filming that they did, that is another really good example of having to adapt in the field. What I especially loved was the angles they did in 2 of those shots. Did anyone else notice? So what they did was they put the camera flat up against the wall. Like this right here. And the first one was actually even better. Where did that one go? Right here. Why is this really good? Why is this super, super useful? So for me, this is because it is showing not only how deep the plaque is, but also how deep the cracks around it are. So for example, if this were the destruction related to a war crime, we would be able to also have later on forensic analysts and architects, such as our friends at Forensic Architecture, who are able to do these kinds of analysis, and be able to look at the depth of something such as a crater, to be able to connect it if they had other information about the types of weapons used, to say, would that weapon be able to create this kind of damage that we see on screen right now? So that is very, very good as well. Anything else? So one other thing I noticed about the location in the beginning was that they also stated the name of the piazza that they were filming in. So as specific as we can get, right? Instead of saying just Lido or just the north side of Lido or outside of this monastery, if we have the name of a specific piazza, that's also, again, something that we investigators could type into Google or other location services. And that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have been able to find it before, but also makes it faster for people who are researching it. All right, great job again. Yes. Sorry, can you repeat that? That's a good point. So I would say that it's not necessarily prejudicial to say it because they were stating why they were filming. So in order to prove. So yeah, if we were going to get really specific, instead of saying this proves that, I would say I am filming for the purposes of helping prove that this was a cultural religious site. Yes. Yeah, so I would say with the point I just made is that it is still up to the people putting the case forward to use this to prove. So the only difference there is like a minor grammatical difference, which is instead of saying this proves, you're saying I am filming to prove, right? Although again, I wouldn't say in any court of law that they would disqualify a video simply because of the difference. All right, team number 3, come on up. We have one final set of videos to view. Who filmed them? It was, I believe, our environment team. This is no longer war crimes.
A different strategy, but I don't
Okay, can you just remind me, can I double check if these are your videos?
Yes.
That's one, okay, so that's one. And how many did you have?
That's the only one.
You only had one? Okay, good. Then take it away. Welcome. Do you want to, I am giving you control of the computer. You start playing whenever you're ready. I'm going to start from the beginning.
As you see, there was still all the because all you see there government to take picture from to buy the case because this is today now we have to they are not being completely free, where is the management. They are completely about the time. I'm coming to contact them, fortunately, found one of them. And that's it.
So this was a violation of the right to a healthy environment here in Italy. You guys were filming a chemical spill, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
You want me
Did you want to add anything else?
So probably to explain it, we were a team composed of 5 or 6 people, and we had different strategy than the rest of the other teams. We have decided that we'll have 3 scenarios, but unfortunately, this is what we end up with only. The scenario said that a spillage happened in the campus area, about 200 meters square, and it wasn't nobody could investigate or monitor or investigate the scenery. It happened 3 weeks ago, and based on that, they have done the cleaning, and we had the chance to be in that location, and we couldn't find anyone to do what's called to give us more details about it. But that's the information that we got.
Does anyone want to add something, anything else that they noticed that was done well about this video? Yes, and did I see him here? No. Yes, in the field, we would not be touching the results of chemical spills with our bare hands. What else? I really actually liked that there was information contained in the video of who they had attempted to contact. Why would this be important?
Because they would say more information about what has been, type of species they were living there, or what the damage, what affected.
This is also important because sometimes people who come in to follow up with investigations may already assume that people in that building have been interviewed. They might spend weeks or even months looking for notes of those interviews without realizing that no one was actually able to get in touch with them. And if it was a government agency that refused contact, then investigators further down the line can, if they continue to refuse to talk, can bring legal action against them to get that information that ought to be publicly available, right? So that is a complete mirror of what happens to the situation I had in Bermuda. So another thing that I would add that in terms of narration is because it was a really good thing that you all were also narrating and explaining what was happening throughout as you were moving, right? So same thing, the camera was pointing to what the narrator was talking about. What would we do differently? Yes.
The one before the life had a dark show consequences of the disaster place with so you actually put it place in the food place where
Yes.
and it was horrible.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure, but I think we should say that it was chemicals. Because it's a bit prejudicial because you can prove it. You can only say that you see some liquids.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to get into. So even though you all, who, let's say you have been living here for years and you know exactly what happened, you might have seen the ship that spilled oil in the days before. If you were doing an evidentiary video and you're not the chemical analyst who is taking samples at the moment and has their lab with them in front of them and has the results of that chemical testing in front of them, you should not be saying this on video, right? That is prejudicial. So again, it doesn't mean the video might be thrown out of use, but it might mean that all of that important contextual information in the narration will be clipped out, right? this video likely, if it's admitted into, let's say, a court, will be admitted without audio. What else?
The area of the cleaning in the other side. Basically.
The area, I thought the area was done quite well. I was able to get a good sense of the how wide the results of the spill were, and from multiple different angles. Now, to get very nitpicky, I'm gonna say, because there was a high amount of narration happening and a lot of filming happening, what I would have done differently is stop at the beginning and talk about, again, what we were gonna film beforehand. So say I am in the southeast corner of this courtyard. We are going to take you through, we're going to do walkthrough, starting at this point, moving north, going east, and we'll come back down. So that would have been a good introduction before the narration started, right? That's just preliminary information. And then as the narration was happening, I would have made a point to stop, have you say what you were saying, right? Contextual information about the scene, and then continue filming, because they got close to the ground when they were filming, right? This is really good. You got closer to the ground, you didn't zoom in, but did anyone notice what happened with the narration as they were filming? With his sound. The camera, the more the camera got further away from the sound, the less we could hear it, right? So we had a big separation between him speaking and what we were viewing on the ground. So what we can do really easily to avoid that is to have you speak,
Finish.
and then you would stop, and then we would film around and go back up, and then we would continue on to the next spot, right? But very good examples. You had good medium shots, you had some good close-up shots as well, and an overview of the area. So that concludes our video reviews. Let's have a round of applause for everyone together. And just to remind you all, this type of filming is incredibly difficult to do. The amount of the quality of video that you were able to capture after only less than a day of training how to do it is impeccable. It's fantastic. So that concludes our week together, I am sorry to say. I am going to give you a couple of final notes on information that I presented today, and that is for interviewing and sexual and gender-based violence, seeking accountability for it. The next slide, which has the Videos Evidence website. We have the Videos Evidence Field Guide has an entire section on filming preliminary field interviews. This will go more into depth about how to prepare to do these interviews, what to do when you're filming, and then also importantly, what to do after you're done filming. And then we wrote an entire separate giant guide just on sexual and gender-based violence. So that was released last year and was based off of working with the same people who had helped create the PSVI protocols, who worked on the BORAD code, and we adapted it for video use specifically. So you can find all of that at vae.witness.org. It's going to be on these slides. I've included my email address on here as well. In terms of the current work that's happening, I am focusing on demonstratives, 3D, and synthetic media use for courts, in courts, for human rights abuses. And the other major focus area right now is the analysis of open and closed source media for international crimes. So I did not talk about analysis today, right? The analysis is what happens after all the filming has been done and it gets handed over to people like me to review. A very important topic that is really often overlooked, and I didn't get into this week, is the preservation. So if you have filmed, or if you work with people who film, or who have other forms of documentation, It can be all for naught if within 5 years, when the tribunal finally rolls around, or when a government commission finally gets established to review a chemical spill, that all of the information we currently have collected is able to be preserved, have their media formats haven't gone out of use and commission, and that we can actually find them. Another big part of Witness's work, and I said my counterpart, the other side of the coin to my program, is the preservation program. They have also written an entire giant behemoth guide on how to archive. So this is for community-based organizations and activists looking to preserve and archive their videos. Finally, we have regional programs. So we have programs in all of the world except for Europe. That is the Middle East and North Africa, Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and Brazil, and the United States. The current focal points in our regional work that I also support are investigating the war crimes happening in Myanmar, Yemen, and Ukraine. We are also investigating and capturing and training people to capture documentation for the defense of the environment in the Amazon, West Papua, and across the Americas. And finally, we're also looking at state violence and police violence across the world, but current focal points in Nigeria, United States, and Brazil. So all other resources, including all the topics you see up on screen right now, including how to share information and what to do in case of internet shutdowns, understanding the right to record, video advocacy, indigenous rights, informed consent, etc., as well as the guides I talked about, are on our free and completely adaptable library resources. So that's library.witness.org. And that is it. I want to thank you all for being an incredible group to have the honor and pleasure of talking with, of working with, and of speaking with all of this week. I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, exactly.